Hello, Sam.
Hello.
I'm going to ask you community questions. We're going to do first come, first serve, except for popular questions. We're also going to do those.
Cool.
All right, the first and I think the most popular question is what are your thoughts on training through being sick versus doing everything to get better ASAP? Usually I just do everything to get better and I'm back in it 2 to 3 days with no loss of anything. TBH, am I missing out by not training through the sick?
I mean, if you feel like you're not losing your training momentum, you're good to go. There's not really anything to change there. The way I view it is like layer one is don't get other people sick. That's kind of douchey. Don't do that. But let's say you have a home gym. I generally train through being sick, and that's more me being an idiot than anything else. No matter how sick I am, I kind of push through it to kind of just to prove to myself that I could complete this session. Don't do that. That's stupid. I think it kind of depends on the severity of how sick you are. If you're pretty darn sick, usually I would recommend doing everything you can to just get better quicker, not taxing yourself with your training, just staying home. I would probably recommend going on walks to keep your step count up. I don't think that's so physically strenuous. That's going to draw out your time to get better. But if you're really laid up in bed, I would probably just take a couple of days off. Drink a lot of water, eat food. You're probably not going to want to, but that'll help you retain your strength while you're not training, if that needs to be a little bit. Then kind of ease back into it. Now, if you're only slightly sick, and let's say you have a home gym, so you're not risking getting other people sick, what I very much like to do is have people just do their main compound lift for the day and then skip accessories. For a lot of people, if they're just slightly sick, that's a big enough reduction in their stressors that they'll continue getting less and less sick, but they can also kind of preserve some of their skill qualities, some of their strength qualities, if you're someone who feels like you backslide if you avoid training while you're sick. So that's kind of what I'll oftentimes do if you're not quite sure, it's somewhere middle of the road, maybe do your main compounds and then just skip your accessories. Get the best of both worlds to some degree.
I realized I did not center you on the camera.
Okay.
There we go. All right, second question. Do you find it beneficial at all if a weak trainee, he says, me for example, at 255 bench, to use much variation? As it stands, I have one close grip bench or close grip pause day and 2 days soft pause bench. Joints fine, getting strong. Any reason to throw in a dumbbell variation?
No, if you're progressing well, just doesn't matter what I say, doesn't matter what anybody say. If you're feeling good, you're progressing well, I would probably just ride that wave out. And then once that starts to diminish, you could start to ask the question of maybe should I add in, I like that scheme of 2 regular days, one close grip day, I think it was. I think that's a great scheme for all levels of lifters. Maybe you could do some dumbbell work afterward as like secondary hypertrophy work if you feel my shoulders are lagging behind. Maybe we'll do high incline or dumbbell overhead. Maybe my speed off the chest is lacking a little bit. Maybe we'll do like rotate those dumbbells to 45 degrees, really row them into this deep position, pause, drive out of the hole. We could definitely look to address some problems, but while you're progressing well, I would really keep your program the exact same and just give your best effort to it, right? Rather than your energy going towards kind of neurotically asking the question, but what if it could be even better? Well, probably just dedicate that energy to doing it even better. And when things do start to slow down and you can't say, oh, I'm making good progress anymore, then we can start to dedicate those mental resources to a shift in our approach. But if we're constantly assessing our approach, sometimes we need to just kind of dumb ourselves down and commit to the plan for a bit if it's working.
Do you have any strength training minimums, both exercise selection and recommended numbers relative to body weight for those exercises?
Oh, is this the guy who said it was for combat sports?
Oh, sorry, I didn't click read more. Yes, for a combat sports hobbyist slash athlete, be it a striker, grappler, or MMA fighter.
No, so I've got my thoughts on this is I don't have minimum strength standards at all. I think you can look at high level performers in a variety of strength sports, and you're going to see a pretty wide variety of performance on like gym lifts. So you can succeed at a pretty wide variety. I think they offer benefit, so I do like to have anybody that asks me for help with their strength and conditioning. They're going to be doing at least a bit of resistance training. I think it's very beneficial. But really, the way I view it is it's not about, oh, you need to get to a 2x body weight squat, and anything less than that, you're not getting the benefits. Or, wait, no, that's way too far. However far you can get while allocating a logical amount of training time and economy to your resistance training, right? So it's like, it doesn't make sense to be in the gym lifting really heavy 6 days a week if that's going to trash your performance in the actual thing you're competing in. Depending on, okay, well, I'm pretty skillful and my physicality lacks. Maybe we could dedicate a little bit more time to in the weight room and a little bit less time rolling because we know our skill is very high. We could get away with working more on our physicality. But if you're more physical and you're like, oh man, I'm stronger than most of the guys I roll with, but they beat me because they're better at they're better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than me. We need to allocate our training time accordingly. So however far you can get is however far you get, right? We pick some good fundamental core movement patterns. We try to chip away at those over time. And let's say it makes sense with your plan to not interfere with your training, to be in the gym lifting weights twice a week. However far you can get giving your best effort those 2 times a week, that is okay. Maybe we deem that our physicality needs to come up and we'll commit to a third and our strength standards will rise, but I don't really have any minimums or maximums or body weight multipliers to go off of. Usually it just comes down to the athlete getting as strong as they can in lifts that we deem to be a good use of time, using not overusing their training economy on it for what it gives back to you as an athlete.
All right, next question. You mentioned looking for weight and volume PRs. Do you work out volume as in weight times sets times reps accomplished, or sets within a percentage of 1 RM?
So reps times sets times weight is like tonnage. Tonnage used to be a very popular training metric and it was used in some studies. And then I think largely we've gotten away from using tonnage because tonnage doesn't tell you much, right? The tonnage of running a marathon is enormous, right? But it doesn't equate for like how that volume was accomplished, right? We could do, 20 sets of 20 with a relatively light weight and the tonnage looks really good, which is why maybe it's not the best metric for how we tally our volume. And there's kind of 2 ways I like to do it. Like you said, counting difficult work sets. We have parameters for those work sets. So let's say it's 6 to 12 rep range. The number of difficult sets put in, that is one way to tally volume. I know Mike Israel's really big on using that number of difficult sets is our proxy for volume. The other thing I like to track is at a given weight, total reps performed, right? So it's like, what's the most volume I've built at 315? And the next time I roll into my next hypertrophy phase, if my percentages call for 315 on the bar, I'm hoping to achieve more total quality working reps at 315 than I did last time. So total reps at a percentage or total reps at a fixed weight is one thing you could look at. And then the more programming side of things, we're looking at number of work sets per session per week.
The next question is about RPE and RIR. He says he's heard a lot of people equate the 2 of them and say they mean the same thing. RPE 8 equals to RIR 2. Prilepin's chart suggests something similar. However, most RPE reps look like they have much more in the tank. Is he missing something, or are the 2 concepts entirely separate?
No, the concepts have a tremendous amount of overlap, right? RPE, as we use it, our RPE originally was like used for like military stuff and running to try to quantify their workloads. But RPE, as we use it in strength training, was largely pioneered by Mike Tusher, who was like, hey, can we scale this to use this as a training metric to give us more detail in describing our training, or kind of shift the paradigm of where the coach doesn't need to give you a weight. The coach says you find the weight, but I have a general description of the difficulty you're supposed to find. And as Mike T kind of pioneered it, yeah, RIR is kind of the same thing as RPE. It's just 10 minus RIR equals the RPE. We use the 0.5s to denote if we're not confident, right? So RPE 9 is 1 rep in reserve. RPE 8 is 2 reps in reserve. And 8.5 would be, I know I had 1. I think I might have had 2, but I'm not sure. Generally, that's how it's used, right? So you could probably make the argument, oh, well, why don't we just use RIR? Why are we doing this arbitrary math equation? And the reason I like to use RPE over RIR is because then it can also scale, especially because I like strongman. I like these varied tasks. There is no reps in reserve on a sandbag carry. There is no reps in reserve on a yoke carry. So then we can kind of use a more traditional rate of perceived exertion chart of like how difficult was it 1 to 10. So that way we can kind of quantify the difficulty of our reps and sets on the squat, and we can quantify the difficulty of the yoke using the same metric rather than having to use a different metric for each one. So when it comes to exercises that we're performing for reps, yeah, it's pretty intertwined with RIR. Some coaches will convey to their athletes like, hey, I want you to factor in rep quality to the RPE you're assigning to it. And the other thing is a lot of the time you're like, oh, that looked fast. That guy probably had more than 2. Why do you call it an 8? There's a lot of fast lifters there's a lot of good lifters that tend to move their reps fast and then they fail. It's just common.
But there's also people who don't know what they're doing.
There are also people who don't know what they're doing. But a lot of the time, I think people will perceive very high-level lifters, reps in reserve, to be significantly higher than they actually are. Like, people will watch the Deadlift World Championships, and they'll be like, oh my God, Jamal could have taken that 950 for 6. It's like, no, he went up 50 pounds and he failed, right? He's a very fast-twitch lifter, right?
Or any of Max's lifts.
Everybody tells me Max's RPEs are always wrong, right? So that might factor in. And also some coaches might communicate to their athlete there's a system they're using that deviates a little bit from that RIR, where maybe an RPE 9 doesn't actually precisely mean they had 1 in the tank. It denotes a general difficulty of a single. But for the most part, yeah, they're kind of the same thing. The switch from RPE to RIR does give me a lot of quality of life benefits as someone who is programming like conditioning intervals, where you can use RPE instead of having to switch back and forth between RPE and RIR. That little math conversion makes it so we can kind of tally things. So I'm like, this whole session we should be standing around RPE 6 to 7. We're not really emptying the tank. And what an RPE 6 to 7 means is like, 3, 4 RIR, and it also means, based on a traditional RPE chart, the smiley face with like, he's got like a neutral, like his mouth is like a straight line. He's not chilling anymore, but he's also not dying, right? So you can kind of go off those old smiley charts that we had in like PE class for those other things, and it lets you kind of use the same metric across the session.
Do you periodize your secondary variations the same as your primary, or do you use a different progression scheme?
So I periodize them the same. When I'm working on hypertrophy that's actually not true. Usually I periodize them the same, right? If I'm working on hypertrophy for my main lift, I'm also working on hypertrophy for the other one. So they're in the same phases of training. What exact progression scheme? Really kind of arbitrary, like how we progress across it. Like if we're putting in sets between 60 and 75% that are relatively difficult, how we progress and how we span that. If I say, hey, you've got a minimum weight, which is 60%, you get a maximum weight, which is 75%. I want you hanging out around RPE 7. Please do 4 sets of 8. That would be one thing, and that would probably give you a result. And then if I said, okay, week 1 is 63%, 67%, 71%, 75%, we're just going to do 4 straight sets of RPE 8. Those are going to yield pretty comparable results, and it kind of gives you a little bit of wiggle room for what meshes better with the psychology of the athlete. So we're looking for that same physical quality, but I'll pick a different progression scheme all the time. Sometimes, depending on what the secondary exercise is, I might actually leave it working on hypertrophy in my strength phase, or in my peaking phase, I might still be working on strength on that. If I deem that it's not really worth taking the secondary motion up into like peaking ranges, I might not take it up into peaking ranges. But usually we're working on similar physical qualities between the two. Maybe one could be a little bit dialed back to get in more volume, because some athletes find when they get late in the training cycle and their volume falls real low, they actually start to detrain a little bit. So keeping their volume a little bit higher on their secondary day, Kirsten, we found this pretty significantly, is if we could leave in a little bit of background volume on that secondary session, things tend to move more smoothly through the peak than if we did 2 peaking sessions like each week.
All right, you often talk about bulking, which is fine and good. I know you haven't done much, but what about some cutting tips? What is a relatively painless way to reduce calorie intake?
Evan Centopani has a video, because he did like the big on a budget videos, and then he did like my best foods for like bulking up. It's a great video, really, really quality. Definitely some of the better, like easy to watch, palatable nutrition info. Just like, hey, let's zoom out for a second. These are foods that I generally find helpful, including in a bulking setting. He also did like I think it was called Bigger by the Dozen was the foods that he liked for bulking. So maybe I believe it was called Leaner by the Dozen, where he actually then reversed as a bodybuilder. He's like, well, here's foods I like seeing present in someone's diet when they're cutting for just quality of life. Let's zoom out. Like we can talk macros. We can talk like bulks and cuts and gains in lean mass. And then your goal is to retain your lean mass. Let's zoom out for a sec. What foods should we probably just have in our diet when we're bulking? What foods should we probably just have in our diet when we're cutting? And a lot of it comes down to like, hey, let's push a lot of like things that are a little bit less dense calorically, so that way we can still feel like we're eating a good bit. That's something I really like to see for my athletes, is like, let's up our volume of vegetable intake is a really, really potent strategy. Going to less calorie dense things across the board so you can really feel like you're eating to satiety is a big thing. And one of the biggest things is just finding a myriad of vegetables that you can eat in quantities that are pretty big. Sometimes that massive spike in fiber can throw off your digestion, but that would be my first tip. And I would go watch that video because it's got a lot more nuanced information than I gave you there.
A deep dive to maintaining lower back health would be amazing, from training stimulus, pre-post training warm-up and stretches, sleeping positions, at-home exercises, the works. I guess we could do a video on that. But...
Yeah, that would have to be I would have to organize my thoughts. I'm not a physical therapist, by the way, right? So when I speak to you guys about things I feel might reduce your risk of injury, or when I speak to you guys about, hey, this pain is pretty common for lifters, this is just me, a dumb bro, talking to you guys, my dumb bro friends, about something maybe you could try to help you out. It's not at all advice from a professional, right? My profession is strength training. My profession is not rehabilitation. But that being said, I've worked with enough people and I've rehabbed my way through enough things that I've got some theories that I'd be happy to share with you, as long as I attach that caveat at the beginning. Well, I'll just not be a bitch. I can give you my opinion. Next question, milady.
Sorry, I'm trying to find ones with a lot of likes. How to become more consistent with implementing good diet and sleeping habits.
The biggest thing is to take it one small step at a time. You're never going to be able to jump straight from a bad diet to a good diet. You're never going to be able to jump straight in from a bad sleep schedule to a good sleep schedule. It's finding small things that are practically actionable and then really hounding yourself to do them for a week or two until it's second nature, and then we can move to the next one. So maybe we just have our sleeping supplements at the same time every night, if that's something you do. Maybe we turn off the lights at the same time. Maybe we just start getting up at the same time every morning. Maybe we just start eating the same breakfast every day, right? The rest of the day, you're going to wing it, because we're going from winging it for 3 meals. Let's just start with one structured meal. Let's just eat the same thing for breakfast every day. We can work in a little bit of variability, right? So if we break down how we think about our meals, yeah, we want to enjoy it. That's probably important. But we also think, okay, yeah, protein source, fat source, carb source, micronutrient source. Generally, that's just a fruit or a veggie, just as a quality of life thing. I like to say that's the 4th category, is micronutrient source, right? You can rotate. Oh, I'm bored of chicken. Buy some fish. I don't care. Buy some eggs. I don't care, right? We can rotate those, but when we start looking at it through that paradigm, we can kind of start being really consistent in our quantities for breakfast. And then eventually we start moving to, okay, we've got a couple of options we can rotate between for lunch, but let's start getting that consistent. That was the big thing that we had to do with Kirsten, was like, she couldn't just jump headlong into eating like a bodybuilder. It was mostly just like, hey, let's get you eating a lunch that we like how it looks each day.
I did try, and I did fail multiple times to eat every meal the same every day.
Yeah.
And it didn't work. So
you don't have to eat the same every day. Kirsten's definitely kind of found that this whole idea of like, well, let's have a framework for the meal, right? We got to get roughly this much protein, but I can rotate between a list of 4 or 5 different protein sources as I burn out on things, right? So it's like somewhere in between, if it fits your macros, is like hypothetically those macros could be coming from anywhere. And then like how most bodybuilders realistically eat is the exact same thing every day. It's somewhere in between where we're doing it, if it fits your macros, from a select list of foods that we know digest well, you feel good when you eat, they got good micronutrients, yada, yada, yada. It's the stuff you should probably be eating.
I think this question might be best answered with resources you could give this person, but he's asking how you program your sets, reps, and RPE for hypertrophy, strength, and peaking phases. He's coming from that interview with Alex and wanted to try and understand it more, to implement it himself.
Yeah, I'll have to make a video for it. Like, you guys have been harassing me for a while about like, hey, can you just break out the whiteboard and just give me the 4 weeks, like the common progressions you'll use to span the 4 weeks of hypertrophy. It's not a secret. I let all of my clients share it with their friends. Like, it's not like proprietary. I will make a video kind of going over that practically, just how you guys can structure your progressions across those. That'd be fine with me. Also, somebody asked just like tips for injury prevention. Again, not my area of forte, but I will give you, I think of it in 3 layers, right? Preparation is what prevents injury, right? So there's preparation during the session, which is doing an effective warm-up where we do enough work on the way up to where we're localizing like local blood flow, we're maximizing core body temperature, all of these things. So there's the shortest term, which is preparation the day of. There's preparation the morning of and the night before, which largely comes down to managing your hydration status and not coming into sessions dehydrated. So your water intake needs to be good and your electrolyte intake needs to be good. and you sleep, right? So that in the short term, what can we do to reduce our injury risk for that workout tomorrow? Go to bed early, hydrate well, eat your nutrition effectively. Don't eat things that leave you feeling bloated and disgusting, because then you're probably inflamed and maybe our risk of injury might be slightly elevated. So that's zoomed out to tier 2. And then tier 3 would be larger term. Again, it just comes down to preparation. Each week of training should look very logical if I looked at your last week. If your session this week does not make sense based on last week's session, it's not a logical jump, you are putting yourself at risk. And so effective program design is probably the single most potent thing you can do to reduce your risk of injury. So each week needs to lead to the next. And there's some guys I know that ramp their weights so goddamn fast. And it's like, oh yeah, last week I did 315 on the bench. This week I'm doing 405. I'm like, what the fuck? You put 90 pounds, you spanned 90 pounds in 1 week. That does not mean week A, week B, week C. Where the hell did you get week C? These, like, you know, these percent jumps, some athletes go as low as 1-2%. You could argue me up to 5-6%. We're not making 20% jumps from week to week. That probably, to me, represents some kind of elevated injury risk. So weeks need to lead into one another. And if you're like, hey, Sam told me some vague idea of weeks needed to lead into each other, he didn't give me the specifics on what he means, but I'm worried if he looked at my week A, week B, he would say that. Maybe I would. Maybe that means you need to take a look at it. So rapid spikes in volume. We do actually have some research to suggest that's not great. Rapid spikes in intensity. I don't know if we have research on that, but it's probably fucking bad. So those would be some general thoughts. Like I said, I am not a doctor. I am an idiot who lifts weights in my garage.
The nice part about percentage increases week to week is as you get stronger and you lift more weight, the percentage jump means more pounds. So you kind of get a reward for getting stronger.
Yeah, no, if I make a 5% jump on my deadlift, it's like 45 pounds in a week, which it's cool. Yeah,
my bench used to be micro plates, and now I get to take 5-pound jumps every session, so that's pretty sweet.
Based micro plates.
So I think we have time for one more question. All the questions were awesome this week, so I'm sorry. Maybe we can answer some in the car because we're about to go into town.
No, actually we haven't tried it with these mics, but we gotta upload it.
Oh yeah. Pre-planned deloads or deload reactively, pros and cons of both.
I probably need to lay that out a little bit more. I did talk about it in a video where I thought I did a pretty good job summarizing like the differences between reactive deloading, where we're really trying to coast a little bit below our maximum recoverable volume. We're just trying to coast and put in as many weeks in a row between kind of our minimum effective dose. So what's the least we can do to kind of drive the general rate of progression we want, and what's the most we can benefit from. We're just trying to like beep, boop, bop, boop. There's going to be fluctuation. We're not perfect in inputting our training, but we're going to try to fluctuate in that range. And sometimes that range comes down. If you sleep badly for a night or two in a row, your work stress is high, you don't drink your water, you don't eat your food, suddenly what was a sustainable training load, the training load stayed the same, your recovery capabilities came down, suddenly you're in the red zone, you overaccumulate fatigue. Maybe we take a reactionary deload because we kind of didn't expect that decrease in your recovery capabilities. So that would be like a reactive deload. A proactive deload would basically mean we like do a bit one week, a bit more the next week. We intentionally exceed what you can recover from on that third week, and we go too hard that week on purpose, and then we take an easy week the week following. So the idea is as we heal from that week where we overdid it, we kind of get a slingshotting, like super compensating effect. Different coaches really like this, like 3 weeks ramping, 1 week down, where we intentionally kind of overdo it every third week because they feel their athletes get a real super compensation out of that intentional, like that functional overreaching, as Chad Wesley Smith would always say. Whereas some other athletes are like, no, I want to log as many productive weeks of training during the year as possible. I don't want to take off every fourth week. I'm stupid as shit. I don't know how many weeks are in a year. How many weeks are, what would be 1/4 of the year? 56?
I don't know.
All right. So, but if we miss a fourth of the weeks of the year of effective training, some people would say, oh, well, that poses a more significant problem. Now, sometimes you get into like older populations or populations with very stressful works, and it's like, okay, it becomes a necessary fatigue management strategy. Sure, I'm not critiquing you at all. But let's say that's not the case. They would say, oh, we're losing out on so much effective training. I think that outweighs that super compensation effect. I fall into that camp of I want to log as many effective weeks of training. I want to log as much effective training as I can as long as it's sustainable. So that's kind of how I think about it.
13 weeks.
13 weeks. That's a lot of weeks to
3
miss,
months.
Baby. But yeah, no, tons of good athletes, tons of people I respect really like that. Waving upward, 4th week deload, waving upward, maybe waving up for 4 weeks, 5th week deload. I know a lot of people that have gotten very, very strong doing that. So I'm never ever going to tell you that's not an effective way to get stronger. It's just not how I think about it.
I also feel like if you're programming for yourself, using that strategy means you're more likely to deload too often.
Yeah, or not often enough, right? Because
Yeah.
everybody has their own unique bias, right? Like if it was left to me,
Or the people that I've been around, that I should
yeah,
add.
yeah. Because it's like if it's left to me, I'm just never going to deload, even though I should, right? Or reverse, right? Some people would just be like, I feel not great today. I'm going to take a deload week. It's like, dude, I'm sorry, but we're driving our body to a place it's never been, and it doesn't really want to go. Your body's prerogative is to keep you alive. It's not to get your body's prerogative is not to get freakishly strong. We have to push ourselves in some capacity, and you're always not going to feel great. This was something Kirsten and a lot of the people I coached that started like a little fresher to lifting. It takes a little bit to understand. Is there such a thing as overtrained? Absolutely, and you need to dial it back. But just because you don't feel amazing does not mean you're overtrained. You need to kind of get used to living life under a bit of fatigue because every single strong athlete that I know, natural, unnatural, small, big, men, women, every good athlete I know is just comfortable living their day-to-day life. They clock into work, they clock out of work, and they're like, yeah, I'm tired. My muscles are sore. And it's just something you learn to live with. It's just part of the lifestyle to some degree. You're going to be, like, if you're a high-level athlete who's pushing to get even better, if you're maintaining, maybe you can feel great. But if you're pushing to get even better, you're going to have to be comfortable living your life with a bit of fatigue.
The end.
The end.